expressions, and this is Charlotte Lim. Jose Maceda. His style looks to the extreme past for inspiration and finds fulfillment in the futuristic and the revolutionary. So say the notes on him.
Professor Maceda is an ethnomusicologist and a composer.
His melodies are not imitations of European melodies because Jose Maceda has always looked for and used sounds native to Asia and the Philippines. Sounds from nature, the jungles and the rice fields. Jose Maceda begins this chat by telling us more about himself.
I started as a pianist. I studied piano in Manila, also in Paris. I studied with famous pianist at that time, Alfred Cortot. Then I studied ethnomusicology in the United States. And I've done much field work in Southeast Asia and particularly the Philippines. I now teach at the University of the Philippines, where I founded, or I helped found, the Department of Music Research at the University of the Philippines.
Why did you specialize in ethnomusicology?
It came about slowly. From after becoming a pianist, I went into musicology, and from then on there was an interest all over the world in music cultures of the world. And that was when I started on ethnomusicology, and particularly ethnomusicology in Southeast Asia.
What was fascinating?
Oh, yes, quite a lot. The music of Southeast Asia was unknown in the early 50s. There were just a few people that were specializing in this music. I don't know if you know the name of Jaap Koens, a Dutch musicologist. He was one of the early explorers of music in this part of the world. And a number of others. Hood came next, who is his prime student at that time, and many others now. So this was a revelation to any musician anywhere in the world to know what is a music that exists in this part of the world, if not Java, Bali, and many other islands in this part.
Of the different kinds of music the different peoples of Southeast Asia make, can you identify them by, say, certain instruments that are similar?
Yes, gongs, of course, are the main instruments in Southeast Asia, from Burma down way east to Flores and the Moluccas. But gongs predominate mainly in the islands of Java, Bali, Lombok, and another set of gongs in Borneo, Mindanao, still another set of gongs in Vietnam and the Philippines. These are the main instruments, gongs. But before the coming of gongs, there are many kinds of bamboo instruments, flutes, buzzers, split drums, percussion sticks, and also wooden instruments. These are unknown instruments among many musicians and considered primitive. They are not really that simple. Some of them can be very complex. So bamboo, wooden instruments first, and bronze instruments next characterize the musical instruments of Southeast Asia.
Do they result from any influence, say, like Chinese?
No. The bamboo instruments in China are different. They are more polished, like, for example, the flutes. But bamboo instruments in Southeast Asia are less polished, but much more numerous, much more varied. The percussion sticks, the bamboo flutes, the xylophones are simple, rural, frugal instruments, but very varied.
So what about the gongs?
There are two kinds of gongs in Southeast Asia. The flat gongs, which predominate more in Vietnam and the Philippines, and the buzzed gongs, which have a knob in the center of the instrument, and they are the instruments of Southeast Asia. Knob gongs. Two kinds of knob gongs. The suspended knob gongs and those that are laid horizontally in a row. A very kind of simple demarcation line between these two kinds of instruments with two different functions. The knob being punctuation instruments and the horizontal gongs being melody instruments.
You've not mentioned anything about drums.
Yes, drums are also important instruments here. Previous to the camel gongs, but used with gongs now. There are the two-headed drums. There are many types of one-head drums with different shapes, conical, cylindrical. These, especially the continental drums, differ from those of insular Southeast Asia. Well, flutes, there are many flutes in Southeast Asia. Many of the flutes are vertical flutes. They are played through the end of the flute, or end-blown flutes. What's interesting about these flutes is the measurement of the holes or the stops. Many flutes in Southeast Asia have the first stop on the middle of the flute, which means the middle being intended to be half of the flute, or intended to be an octave of the fundamental tone, of the fundamental tone being the tone that comes out from playing the flute when all the stops are closed. And so when one bores a hole in the middle of the flute, an octave ensues, and the concept of the octave and the succeeding intervals formed from that octave is particular of this part of Asia and found in many cultures. It's not yet known what type of stops or what measurements of stops there are of all flutes, of all types of flutes in Southeast Asia, but there's already a wide coverage that we know in the Philippines, in Mindanao, Luzon, Palawan, Mindoro, North Borneo, or Sabah, Sarawak, Kalimantan, Java. So it has a wide distribution, this type of formation of flute stops, all vertical flutes. Of course, there are side-blown flutes in Southeast Asia.
What about the rhythms? Do they vary greatly? Are they intricate?
These percussion instruments that I mentioned a while ago that are played, percussion such as drums, such as cymbals, such as suspended gongs, they have a steady beat. Usually when they are played in ensembles, they have a steady beat. So the rhythm then, or the beat, is simple. They have a certain regularity. And what's interesting about this regularity is that is a certain hierarchy in the use of these instruments. I mean by hierarchy, a certain allotment of time between beats. Certain drums or certain gongs or certain cymbals come within certain beats, and because of this difference in time entries, there is a certain hierarchy, a certain importance in the measure of these beats. Say the music of gongs. Yes, probably one common denominator that all gong ensembles have is the presence of a group of instruments which we may call punctuation instruments, percussion instruments. These percussion instruments or punctuating instruments have a steady beat. This steadiness of beat, which we may call pulse, pervades through all, if not most, gong ensembles in this part of the world. So that is a common denominator. The other one is melody. That it seems that while there is punctuation, there is also melody. Now the melody varies. The melody may be played through some types of gongs like metallophones, which is a derivation of gongs, or maybe played also on gongs with bass, gongs laid horizontally in a row. But the melody may also be played by wind instruments or strings. The sarune is a reed instrument which is found in the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java. It has a certain distribution. And it may be played also by the rebab, which is found here in the Malay Peninsula, the 2 or 3 string rebab. So that more or less, that's in a very general way, characterizes the music of gongs. Percussion group accompanying a melody played by either the rebab type instrument or the sarune type of instrument, and a third one, the melody played on a set of gongs.
Was Western music influence on traditional Southeast Asian music, which is widespread?
Yes, that's true. We can go back into history about Western influence, the Portuguese in Flores, in the Moluccas, in the Philippines. It's Spanish influence from, 300, 400 years ago. And has been, from then on developed to the music that we call folk music today in the Philippines, also a keroncong music in Indonesia, probably a similar type of music in the Malay Peninsula. Probably you hear that, as I know people say, in Singapore. We hear many cassettes here from different parts of Southeast Asia on folk music. And now a popular music, a pop music that is Western influence from America, from Europe. It's played by all peoples in Southeast Asia, even in islands, in remote regions. I hear some pop music in Borneo, in Kalimantan, in presumably also in even more remote islands in East Indonesia. And here it's all over the place, in the Philippines. Yes, it's Western influence.
What are your views on this?
It's here, It's here, and it's influencing the youth, especially. But there are certain things that are interesting. I heard a broadcast through the radio of a folk music with Indian drumming, with drums patterned after Indian drums. But it was popular music, very satisfactory. You see, there is a certain innate musicianship in this part of the world. Innate meaning expressed in terms of song and instrument, so that it's possible for musicians in this part of the world to imitate a Western pop music, and imitate it well, so that one has the feeling that it is Western and yet not Western. There's a certain quality.
Let's talk about your music, with your wealth of knowledge in ethnic music of the region, and wealth of knowledge in, Western tradition of music as well. What do you put across in your music, or how do you interpret your artistic self in your music?
My music, it's difficult to talk about my music very quickly. I don't know how to start, because music composition takes on many clothes, many colors. Actually, music composition can be creativity of many sorts. When a famous gamelan teacher, guru, composes music, he composes music in the gamelan after a certain tradition that is gamelan. Or if one in Malaysia composes a music that's fit for the group that hears a wayang, he composes, he makes new words, extemporaneous melody, which is still traditional, that he's composing. But composition in the West is different in the sense that one looks for new materials, changes. It's like writing an essay in a musical way. My music, my music then would be somewhat an offshoot of my researches, of views about what is music in Asia. Also, it follows a European tradition or Western tradition of seeking for an expression, an individual one, based on my own experience about Western music and my own experience about a music of Asia. One thing that's particular about Asia probably is the use of repetition, pulse, drone, or ostinato. It is a characteristic, an element that pervades through the music in this part of the world, also in East Asia or India. And for that matter, drone is also found in the West, in medieval music or even in harmonic music, drone or repetition.
Listen to this example. Ading simply means to sing in Kalinga, the tribal language of the Kalingas of the Philippines. This is a UNESCO recording.
Situn nanumum bariu
So I'm looking for the use of drone or repetition in my music. That's one quality. The other one is the use of many performers. Work in Asia is accomplished by many people, and the formation of instruments, the formation of melodies in ensembles in Southeast Asia is accomplished by a number of people. Without thinking of that formation in particular, since that thinking came after I've already composed a number of works, it seems that I've used that principle of formation of instruments and melodies through the use of several people.
Now listen to what Professor Maceda has made of the Ading song of the Kalingas.
Are you usually intellectually motivated to compose a piece, or do you sometimes just compose a piece through some experience you may feel or have? Your own response to living, that sort of thing.
Intellectual and emotional are one. Probably the intellect is already a rationalization of what is in one's own formation, in one's own being. And so what comes out, the rationalization, the actual music, is the music, the emotion, the thinking, the music. What is emotion and what is reasoning? Probably the two are the same thing. Probably what we mean by reasoning is when you divide these things apart and say, this is the structure, this is the makeup, this is the reasoning behind it. But the total output is what we call the emotion or the effect of the music. We can talk about this thing for a long time.
That was Professor Jose Maceda, composer and ethnomusicologist from the University of the Philippines. This has been Expressions, and I'm Charlotte Lim.
or ostinato is a characteristic, an element that pervades through the music in this part of the world, also in East Asia or India. And for that matter, drone is also found in the West, in medieval music or even in harmonic music, drone or repetition.
Listen to this example. Ading simply means to sing in Kalinga, the tribal language of the Kalingas of the Philippines. This is a UNESCO recording.
So I'm looking for the use of drone or repetition in my music. That's one quality. The other one is the use of many performers. Work in Asia is accomplished by many people, and the formation of instruments, the formation of melodies in ensembles in Southeast Asia is accomplished by a number of people. Without thinking of that formation in particular, since that thinking came after I've already composed a number of works, it seems that I have used that principle of formation of instruments and melodies through the use of several people.
Now listen to what Professor Maceda has made of the Ading song of the Kalingas.
Are you usually intellectually motivated to compose a piece, or do you sometimes just compose a piece through some experience you may feel or have? Your own response to living, that sort of thing.
Intellectual and emotional are one. Probably the intellect is already a rationalization of what is in one's own formation, in one's own being. Rationalization, the actual music is the music, the emotion, the thinking, the music. What is emotion and what is reasoning? Probably the two are the same thing. Probably what we mean by reasoning is when you divide these things apart and say, this is the structure, this is the makeup, this is the reasoning behind. But the total output is what one may call the emotion or the effect of the music. We can talk about these things for a long time.
Yes. Yes. That was Professor Jose Maceda, composer and ethnomusicologist from the University of the Philippines. This has been Expressions, and I'm Charlotte Lim.